And hi, and welcome back to Dogs Do Speak podcast. Today we have a really interesting, wonderful, amazing guest. As you can see, we have Sindhoor Pangal. Wow, Sindhoor Pangal here today. And most of our discussion, or all of our discussion, is going to be around street dogs in India. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Sindor to introduce herself and then we can move into the discussion from there. So, good morning, Sindor, and welcome to Dogs Do Speak.
Thank you so much, Colin.
You're welcome. I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself to the wonderful people watching in. Just tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got into, working with street dogs, and that we can start from there.
Yeah, all right. So my name is Sindhoor Pangal and I live in Bangalore, India. And I have been working with dogs for a while now. Like many people, I started working with companion dogs. But somewhere along the way, especially when we're talking about what is the natural behavior of dogs, I realized that the best way to answer questions around the natural behavior of dogs is to really look at free living dogs, dogs who are not captive, dogs who are not under the control of humans, dogs who have not been trained to behave a certain way. Sort of carry a source of truth that no human being can. And I found that observing them was giving me far more authentic answers than just engaging in a lot of intellectual titillation with people who want to talk about this is what I think natural dogs are and this is where they came from, and it's all just hypothesis as far as I'm concerned. And so that's really how I started working with free living dogs, largely from a research perspective, studying them. And then I went on to get my master's in anthrozoology, which gave me the necessary tools to make sense of it, to express it, um, to understand and understand it in the context of a bigger picture. And dogs are free living dogs, in particular, street dogs. They sit at the intersection of so many concepts like politics, intersectionality, feminism, so on and so forth. So there's just so much that they touch upon their lives, shed lights on so many aspects that it has really been an extraordinary journey for me. And not only from a widening my worldview, but gaining better understanding of myself. And I teach all of that as part of my institution. It's called BHARCS, BHARCS. And our focus is really on how do we take this understanding of free living animals, especially free living dogs, and apply it in our urban lives wherever in the world you are. Most of my students are really international. But to translate that, and to me, that is very special and very magical to see this kind of go from the streets of India to, let's say, a household in New York is just it's mind blowing. So that's really what I do.
Wow. I'm trying to relate to a lot of the things you said. Because we don't have street dogs as such here in the UK, it's really difficult. So one of my first questions would be, what does that look like? How did you start getting involved? Well, not so much involved. How did you first get into working with those dogs? How did you make that first connection?
The very first thing for me really was a conversation that I was engaged in around the activities that a dog engages in. And somebody made a claim to me saying that, dogs are not as active as we make them out to be. Dogs are far more inactive animals and they need a lot more sleep than we acknowledge. And to me, that caused a huge amount of cognitive dissonance. That is not what I had learned. What I had been told was that they're extremely active animals. They have a lot of need for activity, and that we have to do a lot to meet those needs. And so and I'm an engineer by qualification, and so when in doubt, I like reaching out to data. And so what I did is, as soon as I came back to India, I said, I don't want to believe people. I'm going to go straight to the source of the truth. Here are dogs who have shared lives with human beings the way they did right at the beginning. Our relationship, especially in India, goes all the way back to when dogs became dogs and they started sharing their lives with human beings. So 20, 30, 40,000 years, maybe even older. The relationship is ancient enough for them to be mentioned in our mythology. And India represents one of those places where that relationship has maintained continuous. So we're really seeing a legacy of, it's a alive legacy of our history of the two species. And so to me, that's a very, very special place. It really answers the question of what is a dog in the context of around human beings, in the context of existing in this human space. And the free living dogs of India are very special in that they're not a breed unto themselves. They are mixed breed dogs, mixed largely with European dogs for more than 500 years, thanks to our colonial history. And so they really represent the common denominator of all dogs. They carry all those genes within them, back from history across the world, so geographically distributed and all of that. And so I said, that is the perfect place to actually do like a study on their activity budget. And so I started looking at the activity budget of dogs, which is often considered part of an ethogram of animals. So how much time do they spend doing different activities? And maintaining a catalog of that kind is frequently done for many animals. So we do have activity budgets as part of ethograms for many animals, and that's usually studied with the animals left unto themselves. So free living animals with free will, not, so we don't do ethograms of zoo animals, we don't do ethograms of circus animals, not animals in captivity, but left unto themselves. For instance, a bear left unto themselves, what do they do? In a circus, they may ride a bicycle, but that's not where we do the observation. And we don't say natural behavior of bear is they ride bicycles. No, that's not what we look at. So left unto themselves, what do they do? How much time do they spend doing all these different activities? And that is what is called an activity budget. And so that was the very first thing that I started doing, is I started building out an activity budget. And it was really surprising because it was indeed true that they're not very active animals. They do need a lot of sleep. They move rather minimally. And subsequently, that idea has been supported in multiple places. So including, for instance, the Coppingers talk about this in their book, saying, the wolf evolved to travel long distances in search of food, while the dog evolved to sit in one place and wait for the food to arrive. And that is a big part of them being part of the ecological niche that they share with human beings, is that they are scavengers at the end of the day. They are fundamentally primary scavengers, and scavengers benefit from waiting around, not scattering and moving a lot. Uh, of course, at that time, there was also a lab in India, which is part of one of our premier institutes, which is called the Dog Lab. And they have an army of scientists there who focus on studying free living dogs. And so they published an ethogram as well at the same time, which was very validating for me because the numbers were looking very, very similar across my study and their study. And I was like, okay, I'm on to something. This is making sense. And that's really where I started. But since then, my interest has grown into a lot of other spaces. For instance, what do their social lives look like? What do their sleep patterns look like? What do their other entanglements look like? What are the other things that they do? What is the role of conflict? How do they do conflict resolution? A lot of other things that I'm very interested in and I talk about very frequently in many contexts.
That really, there's a lot there. There is a
Yeah.
lot. So how close did you get to get a lot of this data? Were you
Sorry.
working from afar, or how close did you get to the actual dogs themselves to actually
Right.
see exactly what they were doing and how they are living?
Yeah. So collecting data with dogs is a very interesting thing, especially urban animals. With urban animals, you do need to get relatively close to them. Um, So I started out with wanting to maintain a certain amount of distance from them, saying I'm going to try and collect data by standing away and observing them. But you may be able to try and do that with, for instance, wild animals, and wild animals over a span of time may start to accept your presence there, or, as long as you're not interfering with them. But dogs are very different. Dogs are animals, if they realize that there is somebody standing and observing them, their reaction to that is to say, okay, I'm going to come and say hi to you. And it's very hard to not be friends with them, because that I think that is their strength. That is what they evolved to do. While most animals evolved to create space and move away from human beings, dogs are the one creature that evolved to close the gap and come closer to human beings. And they've realized that the closer we get to these creatures, the better our chances of survival are, especially if that human looks like this woman, meaning so the second study I did was actually based on this, which is that they are masters at reading our body language
Mhm.
and to determine whether we have a friendly intent towards them or an unfriendly, hostile, dangerous intent towards them. And so the second they start realizing that this woman is not dangerous and in fact she likes us, it was game over for me. And so by the time I came to the second study, I completely embraced the fact that there would be no gap between me and them. And so I embraced the idea that they would come up to me, and I factored all of that into the study to say, okay, I'm going to instead study what it takes for dogs to come near me and what it would take for me to repel them and how well they read body language. So that was really the focus of the second study that I did.
Wow. Was there at any point you felt any kind of fear from any of these dogs?
Not at all. Absolutely not at all. They were, uh, no, I think the only thing I felt is frustration at not being able to create space between me and them, because they were just all over me, jumping and licking and wanting to play. And I was trying to be stern and ask them to go away. And I'm like, go away, shoo. And they were like, come on, you're friendly. I can see that. And I'm not going to, I'm calling your bluff. And they're extremely friendly. In fact, I remember we had a team who had come down from, yesterday I did an interview with the Garland team. The team from Garland Myotherapy from the UK had come down almost a decade ago to India. And when they came down here, they wanted to study street dogs. So they brought all this equipment and they said, we want to measure them and we want to take measurements of their thigh and necks and put down data. And they had all these misconceptions about the dogs, and they're like, are they going to be afraid with our tools? Are they going to get angry with our tools? What they absolutely did not anticipate is these dogs got extremely curious, friendly. They just wanted to play with the people and they were not allowing any measurements. And they took all the tools and started running around and tossing it. And they found it very hilarious. And they have an extraordinary sense of humor. So they were absolutely enjoying the company of the people who had come to spend time with them. They felt like stars. And I had the same experience with my study. In fact, many of my studies included me visiting them very frequently. So I would kind of go on the same route, walk the same route over and over and over, gathering snapshot data. And they would recognize my footsteps or my bicycle or my car. They would hear it instantly at a distance and they would come running, waiting for me to welcome me, and which was messing with my data entirely because I wanted to see what they do without human influence. But it's one of those uh, Heisenberg uncertainty principle kind of a thing, right? I could not observe them without altering what I was observing, especially with dogs. That is so true. So, not at all. I mean, the fear was the last thing, really. I enjoy their company. They're just adorable dogs.
It just goes to show that when we don't know very much about street dogs, we can have the wrong perception.
Yeah.
And me having had that wrong perception, I couldn't wait to ask you that question. And you have just blown me out of the water, because I've never been in a situation like that in my life. I'd love to be in that situation where I can see dogs roaming the streets of India. Hopefully, one day I can get to see that. But it's very nice to know that they are not well, why do we call them wild dogs? I don't know. Because they have that ability to obviously make their process, go through their process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they process that you are not going to harm them. And before you knew it, your work was all undone. They are jumping all over you, licking you, you know, being being dogs the way we want to see dogs, happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so getting more into your work, and the dogs are looking forward to seeing you, which now I can relate to seeing, TV programs where people are out in certain parts of the world, and all of a sudden these animals are liking the human being. Can't wait to see them kicking the cameras over, running around with bits of, like you just said.
Yeah.
Um, when it, how do we get them to be able to get any kind of medical care? You must have noticed some that were injured or unwell. How did you cope
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand how these dogs have survived for so long around a species like humans, because we as a species, we must recognize, are notorious for being extremely dangerous to animals. So when humans started migrating out of Africa and to the rest of the world, along our path, we have left a trail of destruction where most other species that we came in contact with have just perished, and they continue to perish. And so, if you see, most animals, the mere presence of human beings stresses them out. So in the forests of India, we have a lot of biodiversity. So we have tigers and elephants and all of panthers and things like that. And we have data to show us that just the mere presence of human beings just passing through their territory, and their cortisol levels go up very high. And most wild animals have learned that the best strategy around human beings is avoidance. Whereas dogs are very different in that they have embraced the polar opposite strategy, which is to come very close to human beings. And so the way they have done that, and that has worked brilliantly for them, they are one of the most populous free living animal, megafauna population species. Um, and the reason it has worked for them is they've really learned to exploit their proximity to human beings. So now, while I call them scavengers, and they are indeed scavengers, they're also opportunistic beggars. They're extremely good at begging. And so we know, and we've seen that. We've seen that in our pet dogs too, because dogs are dogs at the end of the day. So we have seen that's where they get that skill from. So their big eyes, big black eyes, the ability to generate oxytocin in our body, the ability to affect oxytocin generation in the human body with just their eyes. It's a powerful, powerful way to get the human to consider, being a little bit silly, suspending their uptightness, and give them food, right? And so any eatery in India, if you go outside it, you will see a dog sitting there, not trying to steal the food, but rather begging and convincing the human, you want to give me that food, I am cute, and you want to do this for me, right? And so the other thing that they're also very good at, along with convincing us that we want to give them food, convincing us that we want to give them shelter, is also seeking and accepting our medical help, medical intervention. So many people who take care of street dogs, they call themselves feeders. Many feeders in India will tell you that when a dog is sick, they come and they show and they say, "Hey, I am injured. Fix me." There are three dogs on my farm here where I live, and all three of them have this tendency to come up to me. One of the dogs, her paw was caught in a wire snare, a trap that human beings had put out, and it was caught in it. And she came limping, and she literally showed her paw to me, saying, do something about it. And I had to cut the snare, and while I was putting the tool into it, the snare would tighten. The more I tried to fiddle with it, the more it was tightening. So it was really hurting her, and she was screaming, and I was worried that she would bite me. And so I stopped. I said, okay, I don't know what to do here. And it was so clear. She was like, I'm screaming because it hurts, but you still need to do this. So do this. Get my foot out of this. Um, and once I did cut it and I removed it, I realized that the snare had actually pierced her paw and gone in. And so the wire was actually going in and hurting her. But despite that, she was like, do it, remove it. I have helped dogs cut them loose from barbed wires, where they've gotten caught in the barbed wire, and I've cut them loose, and they just wait it out, saying, do what you need to do because I know that you can help me. I've had feeders come and tell me the dogs not only come and ask for help for themselves, but they're also good at asking help for their friends and their puppies. So they'll come and say, hey, come with me. You need to help this dog. So come with me. I'll take you. You need to help my friend. So we've seen that as well. So it's quite easy actually to help them. Maybe if they're extremely wary, extremely scared, and of course, individuals are individuals. So while it may be true of most dogs that they can take our help, some dogs are not going to be able to. But it's quite easy to win them over with just a few interactions. We also have studies from the dog lab that show that we don't even need to feed them, just petting them, and we win them over very quickly. We are able to win their trust over very quickly. And that makes sense because that ability for them to recognize that you have good intent and you have the ability to fix things. And there's many lab studies also that show that they're very good at uh, seeing us as, I think there's a study by McCloskey, I can't remember, a paper by McCloskey, I think, where he says that they see us as part of their social unit, and they're very good at collaborative problem solving with human beings, which is very unique to dogs. And so you see that on full display with street dogs. They absolutely exploit that to the best that they can.
Dogs in general are just amazing species, are an
Yes.
amazing species.
Yeah.
And now you're telling us more about dogs in India.
Mm.
They're even more amazing than I actually gave them credit for in the first place. Again, dogs in general.
Yeah.
A lot of the things you said here are all positive stuff from the human and dog relationship point of view. But are they humans that give dogs a hard time
Yeah.
in the streets of India?
Yes, and I think this is a very human trait. Like I said, as a species, we're a very, very notorious species. We are very destructive and very violent. I don't think any species exists with the kind of ability for intra and interspecies violence and harm that we are capable of. This is just so unique to us. And in fact, any species that comes close to human beings runs the risk of complete annihilation, extinction. That's really what we cause. It's not just a little bit of harm to a few individuals, right? We are able to wipe out entire species altogether. And so, absolutely, yes. In fact, I think there's a study by the Dog Lab that shows that 70% of puppy mortality is because of human beings. But at the same time, human beings and human artifacts. So, it could be our vehicles, our, construction equipment, and, directly the harm caused by human beings. Um, in addition to that, I think there's also, these are not owned animals. There is no accountability to what people do to them. So people really do heinous, horrible things to them as well. So there is no dearth of that. And from a violence perspective, I think, of course, it's right up there. We all engage in that. Having said that, human dogs also, I think, in as a species, recognize that while human beings are responsible for 70% of puppy mortality, the 30% that survives and thrives and goes on to become adults also rely heavily on humans. So it is also human kindness. And while we are capable of this extraordinary violence, we are also capable of extraordinary care, and the kind of interventions that we're able to provide, the way we are able to protect and support life is also very unique to our species. And I think that also gets displayed. And so that's why I said dogs sit at the intersection of so many interesting concepts, right? And there's a very interesting quote by Donna Haraway where she says, animals polish the mirror and hold it up to us. And I will not, I can't recollect the exact quote, but it's a lovely one where she says, animals polish a mirror and hold it up to us for us to see who we are. And I think dogs do that. They show us what great evil we are capable of, but they also show us what extraordinary nurture abilities that we have, that we are capable of. So, in the last few months in India, and I know we will talk about that in a little bit, things have got taken a really ugly turn for the dogs in India because of the Supreme Court. But and the Supreme Court has taken some decisions that can really harm the dogs in India. But it's also been the resilience of the human beings that is pushing back on them to say, no, you can't do this. Human beings putting their bodies on the line and using their bodies to shield dogs that they don't know, that they don't own. These little things that are typically considered wretched, dirty animals, maybe for many, but here are human beings willing to risk their own lives and safety to stand up and fight for these dogs. And that's also a very typically human thing that you also get to witness because of these dogs. So
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. We're going to come back to that story in a little
yeah,
in a few minutes.
yeah.
These street dogs, are they ever known to decide, you know what, I've had enough living on the street, I want to come and live with you? Has that ever happened?
Yes. So it's so funny that you asked me this question because just yesterday, the interview that I was doing yesterday, one of the pictures that they brought up there was a one of me with a friend's dog. And so I was telling them the story of that friend's dog, and that dog did exactly that. So she was out on a walk, and this dog just looks at her and immediately decides, hey, this human is friendly, and I'm done with my street life. I'm following you, and I would like I don't want to be a street dog. I'm hanging up those shoes, and I'd like to retire into a home. So it's funny because I remember just weeks before that she had messaged me, because this is not typical of street dogs. Most of them do not actually like that. So the reason she had messaged me is there was another street dog that she was helping, who was convalescing from a surgery. And so she was from a medical procedure. And so she was trying to keep this dog in the house for a few days while the dog recovered from this medical procedure. But she could not do that. She said, as soon as this dog was able to, this dog is such a good escape artist, as soon as she could, and her stitches were holding up a little bit and she was not wobbly on her feet anymore, she found a way to escape and she's run away. And I'm not able to keep her inside the house. She won't stay. And I see the same thing with the dogs here on the farm. I've been trying to see, I've fallen in love with these three, and I've been trying to see if I can somehow convince them to, move in and become my dogs. And so one day they do come into the house and they do hang out with me inside. So one day I just locked the doors and I said, will you sleep through the night? Maybe you will just sleep through the night and stay here. And I wake up in the morning and it was a disaster. They had torn up the walls, they had dug up my floor. I have a mud floor, so they dug up the floor and tried to tunnel their way under the door and get out. And they were like, we're not staying in. And for a week after that, they did not return back. They were like, if you're going to lock us in, then we're no more interested. You can provide us. And this is something that I mentioned yesterday as well. There's a distinct difference between providing shelter and creating captivity. And we'd like shelter from the elements. So when it's monsoons and it's raining or it's very hot or it's very cold, we appreciate being allowed in, but that does not mean we've given up our freedom. We don't want to be captive. You will let us out when we ask us to. And I think that is significant for us to understand when we talk about free living animals. With human beings, this is so easy for us to understand that we would never trade our freedom for material comfort. That is not something we would like to do. Animals also have that, and free living dogs display that very strongly. And so that is the understanding between of the idea of agency of animals, which people don't always understand. How much animals, sentient animals, value their agency, how much of agency we take away from them when we convert them into captive dogs, calling them pet dogs and keeping them inside our houses, how much of that agency they lose,
Mhm.
and the value of returning that agency to them, or at least a semblance of agency, returning that to them, and the impact that it can have on their emotional health and mental well-being, I think is a topic that needs to be explored a lot more by the field itself.
Whilst we're on the topic of freedom, what's actually going on in India right now with the government? Because it's only been brought to my attention in the last
Hmm.
3 or 4 weeks that something is happening in India. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, just to give context, like I said, in India, we have shared space with animals, particularly with dogs, for many millennia, to the point where the stories of these animals are there in our mythology and religion and things like that, which are all very ancient concepts. And despite all of that, up until somewhat recently, um, these animals were recognized as community animals, and their role, they were protected to the extent that it was not allowed to remove them from where they exist and relocate them anywhere, uh, or kill them. But in August last year, the Supreme Court of India, three judges, it started with a two-judge bench and then expanded to a three-judge bench, that decided very spontaneously for no particular reason. So, as part of a suo motu action, which is kind of a spontaneous action from them, that the dogs in New Delhi have to be removed. Then they did see how nonsensical that was. And then they came back and said, well, not all dogs. Let's remove 10% of the dogs, but let's remove them from the entire country. Now, 10% of the dogs is not a small number. India has anywhere between 6 to 10 million free living dogs. 6 to 10 million free living dogs. 10% of that is still a giant number.
Mm.
And we do not have the facilities to do anything with them. And the judges suggest that we remove them and put them in shelters. And the question that we have been asking is, where do these shelters exist? Apart from your imagination, where else do they exist? Not on ground anywhere. So, where do we put these animals? Now, in addition to that, there are some severe concerns that we have been voicing towards this action. This is not as much a plea based on animal rights that we're really talking about, which of course is an issue, and we can talk about that as well in a little bit. But the idea of removing them and putting them in shelters creates a massive rabies risk. So India has managed to, in the last 2 decades, managed to bring down, India is not a rabies-free country, but managed to bring down the instances of rabies by 75 to 80%. And that has been done by following the WHO protocol of CNVR, which is capture, neuter, vaccinate, release, CNVR. Release is a big part of it. And the reason this is a big part of it is when you neuter them, vaccinate them, and release them back, you stabilize the population and you're able to create at least 70% of the population which is vaccinated, which then goes on to create something called as the herd immunity, which arrests the growth of a certain disease. It stops it from becoming an epidemic because 70% of the population is immune to that disease. Now, if you start removing these animals, there is a problem. You have removed that buffer that we have created, very painstakingly created. Oh, it's taken us 2 decades to get there. And every ecosystem has the ability to support a certain amount of life, which is called the holding capacity of that ecosystem. When you suddenly suck out a significant portion of that life and remove it, there is new life that's going to flow in to occupy that space. That is just the law of life. That is
Yeah.
the law of nature, right? Now, what is the form of life that's going to come in? Two kinds of things happen. Immediately, we see a sudden influx of animals like rodents, rats, squirrels, mongooses, snakes, so on and so forth. Now, rats carry not only rabies, but they also carry diseases like leptospirosis and even plague. And so you will see an increase of a lot of other kinds of zoonotic diseases because you're bringing in animals that did not exist in large numbers, and they can bring in new diseases. New diseases is a very, very scary thing. Um, and I will touch upon that. Novel zoonosis is absolutely a nightmare. It's an international nightmare. So this is not an India issue. It's really an international issue. So I will talk about that.
Mhm.
But also in a slightly longer time span, the dog populations also come back because they're talking about removing 10% of the population. So the other 90% will reproduce and will reproduce more, and we know this, when you distress a population, they reproduce more. And so you will have, and our data has shown us this, is that if you remove a stable population, the new population that comes in is double the number. They're unvaccinated. They can bring in rabies. They are very wary of human beings. They're highly stressed. They're in high conflict with each other and can cause conflict with human beings too. So bite cases go up, rabies goes up, population goes up. And the British tried removing dogs in India for over 100 years, and the numbers did not reduce. We have data to show that you did not reduce the numbers or rabies or bites. That
Mhm.
reduction has been achieved by CNVR. And so they're putting this at risk. Now, in addition to this, if you start putting animals in shelters, you again cause a hotspot for disease incubation. That many animals packed in shelters with such poor infrastructure, you're creating biohazard hotspots in different parts of the country. Now, with all of these disease causing environments that you're creating, increasing rats and things like that. The scary part is zoonotic diseases that are novel zoonotic disease, new diseases. So the last time we had a new zoonotic disease, a novel zoonotic disease, was COVID. Now, what happens with a novel disease is we have no vaccinations developed, we have no treatment protocols developed, we're not prepared for it. And so once it comes in, it takes us time to figure out how do we deal with that before that it can spread like rapid fire, especially in a extremely densely populated country like India and a warm tropical country like India. We spread diseases very rapidly, and on top of it, we are an antibiotic resistant population, which means that we are capable of incubating superbugs. So this can be really bad news. The next pandemic could be the gift of India, and that is what we're trying to warn the Supreme Court is, we do not want to do this. It's a high risk situation that you're creating. And considering that we're in the global south, we have a lot of issues with climate change induced issues like repeated floods, very erratic seasons. These are all conditions that can incubate diseases very rapidly. And that has been the main argument that we have been trying to present in court. And though they have heard us out on all of this, um, they're not really, I don't know if it's landing where it should.
Is there any hope that they will see differently?
I mean, we should continue to hope all the time, I suppose. They've not shown any indication of being willing to be reasonable in any way. They have come from a place of bias, and so they are far more interested in listening to anything that supports their bias and have been largely dismissive and sarcastic of anything that doesn't support their bias. And I think a really scary thing, which is perhaps becoming a global trend now, and you see this in the US as well, which is a judicial system that is turning around and saying, we don't care about logic, reason. We don't care about existing laws for that matter. We don't care about due diligence and due process. We don't care about the Constitution. we can go ahead and do what we want to do, because the truth is that the law of India doesn't permit them to do this. A suo moto action is not permitted unless there is a vacuum of law. But India does not have vacuum of law around dogs. We have existing laws that have been based on science, and our methods are globally recommended by the WHO based on more than 3 decades of data that was collected and presented. This is good, solid science that has supported good law. The fact that they're bypassing this, the fact that they've not used any subject matter experts, the fact that they are showing complete bias in the way they're hearing the cases, none of this is legally permissible in India. So what they're doing is uh, uh, a mockery of the legal system of the country, and things that we have come to take for granted, like the constitution, like the written word of the law, like due process that's supposed to be part of a judicial process of this kind. This is scary, and this is what's happening. We're seeing this in the US as well, right? Where courts are doing things that they're not permitted to do. Leaders are doing things that they're not permitted to do, and they're turning around and saying, we'll do it anyways. What are you going to do about it? That, I think, is it's more than just about dogs. Like I said, this whole discussion around dogs points to a lot of things more than dogs. And in this case, it's pointing to the kind of political collapse that we're seeing, judicial collapse, this systemic collapse that we're seeing. And India is taking a lot of hints from the US on this, which is also very, very scary. It looks like we're beginning to inspire each other on what can we get away with. Oh, look, we can get away with this. So it has to be very worrisome for all of us.
It sounds like very, very sad times for people like yourself and the dogs. I hope and pray that the government come to some kind of U-turn in the way they think, and hopefully it all ends well. But you're very much right about when we remove so many animals, they will be replaced with other animals. And you're right, it's very natural.
Yeah,
Yeah. But the ones we are replacing with are not the ones that are vaccinated and
yeah,
neutered. And like you said, they're going to come with their own baggage. And then the
yeah,
whole process has to start again.
yeah,
So common sense does tell me let's leave alone what we
yeah,
are creating and the objective worlds as we move forward, so that we know what we have.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we can
In
see what we
fact, there's data, I think, from uh, South American, sorry, South Asian country. I want to say maybe Indonesia, if my memory serves me right. There is actually a case study that shows that when they conducted a massive cull in a village near Bali, um, it was a rabies-free village to start with, but after they did the cull, they saw instances of rabies there. And so that is precisely what we're terrified of. And in India too, several years ago, we had flooding in a place called Surat in India, and we've seen that in Kerala as well. So multiple parts of India, we've seen this. So what happened there was a massive cull of dogs. Rat populations have gone up, and then they had floods. And what happened immediately after the floods is, the rats died, and the fleas that carry bubonic plague that live on the skin of the rats left the bodies, because the bodies get cold after the rat dies. And so they left the bodies and they moved on to human beings, and thus causing a bubonic plague outbreak amongst humans. And so there are valid cases that we have seen over and over, snake populations going up, and India has a lot of venomous snakes, and we have at least 50,000 people who die of snake bite every year in India. And this is not just rural parts of India. Urban parts of India, very posh places of India, all of them have snakes in India. And so those numbers are going to go up too. It's a country like India cannot expect something like this not to have consequences. So it's very mildly put, it's very stupid to actually take such a large decision without involving a single expert on epidemiology, in ecology, in ethology, in dog behavior, and there are all these fields that we should be looking at before we take such a massive decision. A
Yeah,
population of 1 billion human beings and 10 million dogs. That's not something we do lightly.
it's frightening.
Yeah,
And the more you're speaking, it's frightening.
yeah,
Um, and that's why I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and pray that it turns out that the Indian government come to their senses.
yeah,
Um, you're absolutely right when you say that they should involve people like yourself, yeah, so they can have more of an understanding about dogs,
yeah,
yeah, because I
yeah,
think it's very similar to, how can I put this? Us as, dog professionals trying to correct a behavior without finding out why the behavior is occurring in the first place. Why is it happening? Yeah. Um, so if they take the stance they're taking, they've gone over the why,
yeah, yeah,
they've bypassed it,
yeah,
and not realizing some point in the future, if they continue with what they're doing, it's going to come back and say, why did you do this?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so it's frightening, very
Yes,
frightening.
yes,
Sindhoor, it has been an amazing discussion, and I feel there is more to this discussion that we can pick up on a later date. Yeah,
yes, yes,
especially when we have more input from the government or output, really. Yeah,
yeah,
that we can then come back and see where we're at. Yeah,
yeah,
how it's all going for the dogs in India, and have the government done a U-turn, or have they met you halfway? Yeah. So I think there is another podcast here to be had,
yes.
where people can actually get a part two of the story.
Yeah.
So that's going to be end of us here today at Dogs Do Speak. So until the next time, enjoy the podcasts. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of our new content. Bye for now.